Welcome to Trauma, Healing, and the Child's Mind series. This journey was born from a powerful personal revelation, a mother's call to transform pain into purpose. We sincerely believe that even from the deepest wounds, wisdom can emerge. Through focused learning and nurturing, our expert team brings unique insights and powerful tools to help you shift your perspective and truly begin your healing journey. At Driven Livin', we're here to support you with resources like the Drive Collective, self-improvement courses, guided meditations, and journaling. If any part of this conversation triggers you, please find immediate professional resources listed in our description. This is our shared path to evolving our paths into wisdom together. I hope you enjoy the series. Unmasking Child Sexual Grooming, Prevention and Protection with Dr. Elizabeth Jeglic. Child sexual grooming is a complex and insidious crime with devastating consequences. Join me as we welcome Dr. Elizabeth, an internationally renowned expert in sexual violence prevention and child sexual abuse. In this crucial conversation, Dr. Jeglic brings decades of expertise to discuss the tactics and techniques used by child sexual groomers, how to recognize the signs of grooming behavior, practical strategies for protecting children from sexual abuse, the long-term impact of grooming and abuse on survivors, and evidence-based prevention and intervention methods. Learn how to empower yourself and your children with knowledge and tools to prevent and address child sexual grooming. Welcome to the Wellness Driven Life Show, where you're about to go on a wellness-driven ride. Welcome. Let me share a little bit about the incredible guest that we have with us today. Our guest is Dr. Elizabeth Jeglic, an internationally recognized expert in sexual violence prevention, sexual grooming, and child sexual abuse. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Dr. Jeglic is a leading authority in this field with over 180 publications and extensive experience as an expert witness and consultant. She's also the author of Protecting Your Child from Sexual Abuse, Sexual Grooming, and Sexual Violence, Evidence-Based Policy and Prevention. Her work is frequently featured in major media outlets, and she blogs for Psychology Today on sexual violence prevention. Welcome, Dr. Jeglic.
Thank you, April. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. It is such an honor to have you on the show for this incredible series that we have going. Let's get started by sharing a little bit more with the audience so they can get to know you outside of that brief biography.
Thank you again. And I think this is such an important topic, but a hard topic to talk about. So I'm thrilled to be able to share kind of, some insights that I've gathered from our work with your audience. I am first and foremost a mom of three. I have three children, the youngest having special needs. And that really drives the work that I do in sexual abuse prevention because I want to do everything that I can to keep them safe. And sadly, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 20 boys in the United States will experience child sexual abuse by the time they reach 20. those consequences are far-reaching. They're negative psychological, socioeconomic, physical consequences to child sexual abuse. And so it is 100% preventable. So anything that we can do as parents, as community members, as members of our society at large to keep our kids safe, I want to be able to do it. And so that's really been the focus of the work that I'm doing, is to really identify what we can do to help protect our children before this happens to them.
You have been such a bright, bright light for us during this time period. And, I would love to know what was your initial, I know that, regarding your kids, but was there something else that was a little deeper for this initial desire to want to get knowledge out there, awareness out there?
I think there are a few things. I was studying sexual violence generally, but focusing more on the perpetrators and legislation. But then in 2008, a few things happened. One, there was an article published that showed that 95% of all people who were on the sex offender registry had never committed a sex offense before, which meant that these were not people that were known to the system. And so, all the resources that we were doing, making these laws and focusing on the perpetrators that we know about, was really missing a big piece of the puzzle. Simultaneously, I became a mother at that time, and I thought, let's really shift the narrative. And like we were talking about, preventing those who've already offended, but let's talk about prevention, because once it's done, it's already hard. So let's try to prevent the kids from happening in the first place. And then I also got my partner in crime very soon after that, Dr. Georgia Winters, who was my doctoral student, and she was really interested in sexual grooming, and we kind of developed this course of research over the last decade or so together.
Wow, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a criminal justice background, and the numbers and statistics are staggering, and it's just a flawed system. So I agree with you where it's, let's stop this before it even happens, right? Let's not make it an issue from the get-go. And so the research and the studies are very clear. I remember too, as a young mom, you said that was where you were at. You were a new mom at the time. We have so many emotions that are just in turmoil and constant up and downs when our bodies are doing different things with motherhood. Yeah. And I recall very much about an instance where I had watched a movie and it was Tears from the Sun. I don't know if anybody knows Bruce Willis. It was a very difficult movie to watch about genocide in Africa. And so watching that as a new mom, I was just bawling and tearing and swearing up and down that I would protect my child forever and ever. But as you learn moving into motherhood, that's not how it works. You can't protect them always for everything, but we just do the best we can, such as Dr. Jeglic, what you are doing now, building that awareness. So let's move into some of the things that we should be aware of, become aware of as parents, as teachers. What is it like, even as children? What are some of the signs?
So our recent research has found that 99% of all child sexual abuse involves child sexual grooming. And so my colleague and I have developed what we call the sexual grooming model, which is a 5-stage model describing the sexual grooming process. And what we've tried to do is really empirically derive these behaviors that are observable and tangible that parents can really identify before the sexual abuse happens. And so just to give you a brief overview of the model, the first stage is that the perpetrator will select a child who is vulnerable. And the child can be vulnerable for psychological reasons. They feel unwanted, unloved. They might be very compliant to authority. They might have some behavioral problems, or they might be vulnerable physically because they lack guardianship. After the child is selected by the perpetrator, they want to gain access and isolate them. So with the younger children, this involves, kind of befriending or kind of ingratiating themselves in the family, or getting into a youth serving organization so they have access to the child. With older teenagers, it's a little bit easier because they can usurp parental guardianship, because teens are a little bit more free and they can, access them online or through text messaging. They then work to isolate them by, doing things alone with them, taking them on overnight stays. The next stage is the trust development stage, which is the hallmark of sexual grooming. And this is why a lot of people think it's hard to detect, because this is where the person is really finding that child's vulnerability. So if they lack, self-esteem, they're providing them with a lot of great mentoring behaviors that look like, things that we'd want adults to do. So they're telling the kid they're special. They give them a lot of attention. They tell them they love them. They may be doing activities along with them, giving them gifts and presents. They portray themselves to be upstanding members of the community. So when we see those boundary crossing behaviors, we don't actually suspect them because we say, oh, that's a good person. That person would never harm a child. And so we kind of, even though like our spidey senses might be tingling, we kind of, dismiss them, right? Because we feel like that's a good person. And then the fourth stage is the one that is the most detectable. That is when those physical and sexual boundaries get crossed. So we call it the desensitization to physical and sexual, physical contact and sexual content. And so they start, either bringing up sexual topics, talking about it, like asking, especially with adolescents, we see talking about sexual topics like, what have you done? This is what I've done. With younger children, they start to kind of touch them. So it might start innocuously with, hugs, and tickling and things like that. And then it becomes increasingly more sexualized until that barrier is crossed and the abuse happens. And then after the abuse happens, we have labeled the stage post-abuse maintenance. And that's where they kind of convince the child that it was okay, or that it was, that there was nothing wrong with what they did, or they tell them it's a secret, not to tell anyone. It's kind of like that, what we kind of colloquially term gaslighting. They kind of make them feel culpable and responsible. They also might, say that if you tell, we're going to get in trouble, the family might break up, things like that. And that prevents the disclosure of sexual abuse. And what we know is that most kids do not report child sexual abuse at the time that it happens. Some will report in childhood. A lot of people don't report until adulthood, and some don't report ever in their lives. And so it's really hard to detect. And so, bringing awareness to this, both for the children and also for, adults, really helps them to come forward and disclose, and gives us the strategies we need to support them when they do.
Wow, you are certainly an expert because you went through so much in such a short period of time. All of the signs, all of the signals from the beginning to the very end. And I love how you bring up so many insights of what is happening to a child's mind, the way that the perpetrator acts. They're an outstanding citizen. Nobody would ever suspect. We see that a lot too in, people who commit continuous crimes, right? Like, murder after murder after murder. They usually embed themselves in society in some high standard so they don't get caught, right? And also the point where children, they don't usually, and I don't even know the numbers, but the numbers honestly wouldn't even matter because statistically you don't get those numbers because it's not being reported. And so the amount of non-reports is more staggering than what we have as far as the stats. But when we bring in that children don't normally say anything or report it because their minds are so fragile and they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to comprehend, and they're being told that maybe this is okay. And then as they get older, they're starting to realize, oh, maybe that wasn't right, or this person said that about that. And so, wow, was something really wrong there? Yes. And they get older and then they report, or they don't because they're like, gosh, it happened so long ago. I don't even know if it's valid. Is anybody going to believe me?
Mm-hmm. And it's so hard. And what we're finding with survivors is it's a lot of guilt and shame that results from the child sexual abuse. And, I think understanding the grooming process and that psychological manipulation, I think, is really important because it alleviates the survivor from that guilt and shame, because it is not their fault. Sexual abuse is never anybody, the person's fault. It is always the perpetrator who is doing this. And so even if you didn't yell and scream, because that's a rape myth that happens, people internalize that they should have done something, like, I should have said stop, I should have gotten away, why did I keep going back? But that is that psychological manipulation, that grooming that, the person has engaged in, because there's something that person has that child wants, right? So they're filling a need for that child. And so they might love the relationship, but they hate the behavior, the abuse. And so it's kind of like very juxtaposed, and the child is often very confused. And we see, especially with adolescent girls, that they often fall in love with the perpetrator. They think that they're in a consensual relationship. And it's only later they recognize, that this was highly inappropriate, that this was a manipulation of them, and that this was really sexual abuse.
Oh, Dr. Jeglic, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We're going to move into our first commercial, and when we get back, let's go more further into what is it like in the eyes of the perpetrator, what may be happening in their own, and where they may be abused as well. Stay tuned. Are you ready to take control of your ride to wellness? Rev up with Driven Living. Visit www.drivenliving.com and buckle up for a journey. Get exclusive access to our Wellness Driven Life Show guest portal, where you can dive deep into the minds of our esteemed guests. Sign up for our newsletter and get insider scoops on these distinguished personalities. It's like having a backstage pass to their life-changing wisdom. But that's not all. You'll also receive a free hug. You heard me right, a free hug. An enlightening ebook from the Driven Living team. Discover the science-backed benefits of hugging yourself. It's a fill-up for your wellness tank. Because at Driven Living, we believe in fueling your journey to wellness, both physically and psychologically. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.drivenliving.com today. Welcome back, everyone, here with Dr. Jeglic on child sexual grooming. You have brought so much to the table already of what to keep an eye out for. Do you have much experience with the person who is conducting the grooming, why they would do things like this, why they don't feel like they can stop and they continue doing it anyway?
So I started my career focused on, treating those who perpetrate sex crimes to prevent sexual violence. And so while I wasn't studying specifically grooming, what we do know is that it's only about a third of those who perpetrate sex crimes against children that have kind of that predatory pedophilic nature, that they actually go in with the desire to offend against a child and they seek those opportunities. The other 2/3, what we find is that it's more situationally based. There might be some, underlying pedophilic interest, or it might just be that, that they have deficits in their own lives that child is filling in a very inappropriate way. And so, while the behaviors don't necessarily look any different, we see that regardless of the motivation behind the child sexual abuse, whether it's situationally based or it's kind of predatory in nature, the sexual grooming behaviors remain the same. So, it's really, from a prevention perspective, not really that important. I guess when you're treating the individual, those are things that you would focus on differently. But from our perspective as parents, as community members, the behaviors look the same regardless of why that person did it.
That's very interesting. What are some of the ways that you would say, if it has already happened and to a child or maybe a young adult who is, has had that experience and has been preyed upon and victimized, what are some of the things that you would say to them that, we know to say it's not your fault, but when it is that person of trust and that closeness and that, idol and worship almost, this person who has victimized them and they just don't, it's difficult to separate that.
Yes.
What are some words that you might say?
I believe you. It is not your fault. And I explain sexual grooming to them. I explain what has happened to them, because I think knowledge is power, right? And the more that you can understand, what has happened to you, why somebody would do this to you, I think that kind of helps with the healing journey. There is research to suggest that if you have experienced childhood sexual abuse and you do go seek, trauma-informed care, preferably, cognitive therapy based, that you can work towards healing and it can, minimize those long-term consequences that you're going to experience. So there is help available, and just being there and being available for the child and believing them and supporting them and, letting them, therapeutically informed treatment lets them be the decision maker. So whatever they feel that makes them safe, I think is really very important, and really listening to that child.
I have thought about this a lot and wondered, how challenging it would be for somebody, which is why we want the prevention and protection first and foremost, because you really identify yourself. And I call it identity crisis a lot, when we've had something really shake up our worlds, because we're no longer who we think that we were or were supposed to be, or the servitude of someone or something that we thought was who we were supposed to be or do. And when that's shaken up, it's this identity crisis. And as children, we really soak that up. We become who we're supposed to become based on all of the things that happen, all the experience, all the information that floods so rapidly into our sensitive minds and worlds. And so it can be very challenging to get out of that. Now, when you're in that child mentality and role, you say to educate. So when we talk about prevention, what are some of the things that adults and parents and anybody in a position of trust and care can help guide and lead these children out to a better knowing and better understanding? What are some of the first delicate steps?
Do you mean with children who have or have not been abused yet?
Who are in the process of, or somebody suspects that may be happening? What can you do first and foremost where it's comfortable for them? What do you suggest?
Just let them know that they're in the driver's seat, that you are not pushing them for information. They are going to tell their story. What we know about how children disclose is that they put feelers out there, right? They're looking for safe people, and your reaction is going to be very important for them. So you need to be there supporting them and believing them and let them know. And you can say, when you are ready to share, I am here to help you. And how do you want to share? And then, seeking professional help and support in that journey, I think, is really important. While it is wonderful to go, if you can do it, the criminal justice route, it is very difficult for children and families to do that. And so you have to do what your child wants, and what makes them feel safe. And so, while ideally we don't want anybody to be able to do this again, you also don't want your child to be re-traumatized. And sometimes the criminal justice system can be traumatizing. So
I appreciate that you bring that up. I've had a lot of experience with that, sadly, that it can be that way. And like I said, this is such a delicate matter. It's kind of like you have to be so thoughtful, mindful, and very slowly ease into explanation, and where they feel safe and comforted. So I'm curious, because you have so much extensive knowledge in the criminal justice arena, what are some examples, if any, that you might have of things either working in favor or not working in favor?
Again, like really understanding and supporting the child through all stages of this. Like a lot of the child advocacy centers have wonderful forensic interviewers and teams that can really support you in your local communities when your child discloses, and they can, provide you with resources and treatment. A lot of police departments are trauma informed, and they have victim advocates that can help you and be your partner along the road, because it's a long process. It's not like you report and the trial happens the next day. It can be months and even years. And so that's really, kind of unnerving for the child, and letting them know and keeping them informed. Again, like that's really part of trauma informed care, is letting them, know every step of the way. You might think you're protecting them, but kids have a lot of worries. And again, like it's really giving them that ability to understand what's happening. And so they're better. They're probably able to process information maybe better than we can. Like I think they're really, tough little people, and you want to give them, the resources and the knowledge to make those decisions. And then, if it goes to trial, they have ways, and you can work with prosecutors so that children don't have to be in the same room necessarily as the perpetrator. They can testify in a different room. So you want to make sure that you are advocating on behalf of your child and working with those supports and asking for those supports along the way, because ultimately you want to, hold the person accountable for their behavior and make sure that they don't do this to somebody else.
Mm. Finally, one last question. Curious, what do you recommend to parents and to victims where instances of this had happened in the past. It's already done, and they don't receive the justice as they seek. And what that does to maybe all parties feeling really, again, maybe victimized, disempowered by that. What would you suggest for people who really don't get any further as far as, justice, and that person is still, living it out in society and free? What are some of the things that you recommend and suggest there?
I mean, it's a hard situation. And I think a lot of it is, keeping yourself safe, making sure that you are physically safe, and getting the support that you need from, be that, professional support or those around you, kind of working to develop coping skills, strategies to help you feel better, grounding techniques. I mean, sexual abuse is a trauma. And so if you have to come in contact with that person, some people do because they're part of an extended family or they're still in the community and they see them around, how to handle those situations. But again, having those people in your life that know what has happened to you and are there to support you, and really working, if you can, with professionals who can give you the skills that are needed for healing, and really recognize it's not your fault. Because as I said, the research shows that it's those feelings of guilt and shame that drive a lot of the negative long-term consequences. So if you can absolve yourself of that and recognize that this is in no way your fault, I think that will help kind of that journey of healing and resilience. There's a lot of wonderful survivors who talk about how the journey to resilience and that they can still lead very good lives.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned that. If you can just resolve yourself of that, do the work to do that it certainly is a trauma. And we all have work that we need to continuously do in our own growth journeys, self-improvement journeys. So, Dr. Jeglic, thank you so much for being a guest, an incredible expert guest on the Wellness Driven Life Show for this series, and for giving us all of the things and signs that we should be mindful of and look out for and be cautious about. When we listen to this and we move throughout our life, there's going to be things where we'll light off this conversation, right? We'll have a better understanding of, hey, maybe I should look further into this. Yes. So again, I deeply appreciate your time here with us. I want to make sure everyone knows where to find you. I've had it displayed here on the screen a few times, but for those of you listening in, elizabethjeglic.com. It is also in the description below. So check out her site, her services, all the things that she does. Follow her in, the social media aspects that she's in, the news that she's in, and the cases. Truly is an honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. And thank you to our audience, because without you, the show wouldn't be possible. So goodbye for now, and we will see you next time.
I'm hoping this mask will provide